Want scary stories? Listen.
Father Pavel served in a small church on the outskirts of Kentucky for almost 9 years. And in those 9 years, he had never missed a single evening service. Not during snowstorms, not when his mother died, not even when a drunk driver crashed into the church and tore half the front doors off their hinges. But on the night of November 14th, 2019, he tried to leave the church before the service ended for the very first time, because at exactly 10:17 p.m., he heard the confessional bell ring for someone who was never inside the building. The rain had started earlier that evening, heavy cold rain that made the old stained glass windows tremble every time the wind hit them. By 10 o'clock, the church was empty. The last parishioner, an elderly woman named Mary, had left around 9:30 p.m. Father Pavel locked the front doors, extinguished part of the candles, and began preparing for the nightly prayer. St. Jude's Church was old, very old, so old that beneath the building there were still underground chambers dating back to the Civil War. Locals used to whisper that bodies of dead soldiers had once been stored beneath the church until the frozen ground thawed enough for burial. Pavel never believed those stories, not until that night. At around 10:17 p.m., while sitting in the sacristy writing down church expenses, he heard a small bell ring somewhere down the hallway, the bell inside the confessional. Someone had come for confession. Pavel glanced at the clock. Too late. Far too late. But rules were rules. He stood from his chair, adjusted the cross hanging from his chest, and stepped into the dark sanctuary. The church was almost completely black. Only a few candles near the altar gave off a weak orange glow, and somewhere above him, beneath the wooden dome ceiling, the wind slowly rocked the old beams. Creak, creak, creak. Pavel walked slowly between the rows of pews toward the confessional, and even then, he felt something wrong. The church was too cold, not autumn cold. This cold felt unnatural, like standing in front of an open freezer. With every step, the air became colder. When he reached the confessional, someone was already sitting inside. He could see the silhouette through the carved wooden divider. Still, very tall. Pavel sat down on the opposite side and quietly said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, what troubles your soul?" For several seconds, there was only silence. Then the man inside finally spoke. The voice was male, raspy, like someone who had not spoken in years. "Father, I have sinned." Pavel nodded, a normal beginning, but then the man continued, "I killed my wife." Pavel froze. Confessions like that were rare, but not impossible. Carefully, he asked, "When did this happen?" The man answered immediately, 32 years ago. Pavel frowned. "And you decided only now to confess?" Silence. Then, "No, I came before." A chill ran down Pavel's spine. Something about the voice felt wrong. Not the words, not the accent, but the way he spoke. As if he wasn't remembering events. He was remembering smells, sensations, like he was still there. "I strangled her beneath the church," the voice whispered, "in the old basement." Pavel felt sweat forming in his palms. Almost nobody knew about the basement. The entrance had supposedly been sealed decades ago. "We argued," the man continued. "She wanted to tell the police about the boy." Pavel slowly looked toward the dark ceiling. The boy! And for the first time, the man laughed, very quietly, but the sound was so unnatural that Pavel's stomach tightened instantly. It wasn't laughter. It sounded like a drowning man trying to breathe. the one we buried alive. One of the candles near the altar went out, by itself. Pavel turned sharply toward the sanctuary. Wind? No. Every window in the church was closed. When he turned back toward the confessional, the other side had gone silent. Too silent. Slowly, Pavel whispered, "Sir?" No answer. He stood carefully and opened the other door of the confessional. Nobody was inside. Empty. Only the old wooden seat and a puddle of water on the floor, as if whoever had been sitting there was completely soaked. That was when something slammed deep beneath the church. Boom! Pavel froze. Another ooter echoed below him. Boom! Like someone pounding against a massive door underground. Then he heard it. A child's voice. Weak, faint. "Please, boom! Let me out!" Pavel's breath caught in his throat. No, that was impossible. The basement had been sealed in the 1980s. Boom! Now the banging sounded louder, and mixed with it came another sound. Shuffling footsteps, somewhere beneath the church floor, as if someone was slowly walking in the darkness directly below him. Pavel stepped backward and suddenly remembered something. 3 months earlier, an old man named Walter Grayson had died, the last surviving member of the original church council. Before dying, Walter had repeatedly asked to speak with a priest. But Pavel never found the time. And now he remembered something else. Exactly 32 years ago, Walter Grayson's wife disappeared. The police never found her. Cold sweat rolled down Pavel's neck. Boom! The pounding became violent now. Dust rained from the ceiling. Then suddenly, every light in the church went out. Completely. Only a few trembling candles near the altar remained. And in their flickering glow, Pavel saw wet footprints, bare human footprints. They stretched from the confessional straight toward a basement door, a door that should not have existed. Pavel was certain it had been sealed decades ago, but now it stood slightly open. Cold air drifted up from the darkness below, along with the smell of wet earth. The child's voice whispered again, "He's still here." Pavel should not have gone downstairs. Every instinct inside him screamed to run. Leave the church, call the police. But deep down, he understood something. If he walked away now, someone would stay trapped there forever. He grabbed one of the candles and opened the basement door. The stone staircase descended into darkness, ancient, narrow. With every step, the smell grew stronger. Wet soil, mold, and something else. Something sweet. The smell of decay. At the bottom was a long underground chamber, lined with old brick walls. And there, on the far wall, were scratches. Hundreds of tiny scratches, as if small fingers had clawed against the bricks for years trying to escape. At the base of the wall lay a small wooden cross. Pavel picked it up with trembling hands, and behind him, he heard wet, coughing laughter, very close. Slowly, he turned around and saw a tall man standing in the darkness of the basement. The man's neck bent sideways at an unnatural angle. Wet clothes clung tightly to his body. Black water poured from his open mouth. But the worst part was his eyes, completely black, empty. The man smiled and whispered hoarsely, "Father, you're 32 years too late." The candle went out, and the church security camera footage ended at exactly 10:43 p.m. When police arrived the next morning, the church was empty. Father Pavel had vanished. But beneath the sanctuary, investigators really did discover a sealed underground chamber. Inside were the remains of a woman and a child. And one more thing. Written across the brick wall Among the scratches was a message that looked freshly carved, as if it had been written only hours earlier. It said, "He still hears confessions.